Yep. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 8th town hall for the Gershon for Congress campaign. Last summer, I pledged to hold 10 town halls in the 10 months before the primary, and we're going to exceed that number. However, to protect the community during the coronavirus pandemic, we've suspended all in-person campaigning for nearly a month and shifted all campaign activity to online and virtual events. Last month, our Bellport Town Hall was moved to a virtual setting, and we're doing something similar again tonight. Joining me will be 2 medical experts and hopefully 3 local officials who will introduce themselves and share their expertise as we take the questions from you, our audience. However, first, before I make the introductions, let me address 2 realities we're all facing. What we're going through is unprecedented. There's no script for success, no easy set of answers, and the outcome remains unknown, but it's one we all have the ability to change. Our day-to-day lives are different. For how long? Nobody is sure. Information evolves on a constant basis, and we must process the facts and sort them out from the political spin. That's why I'm holding these town halls and why I've brought together these experts tonight who can give us their good guidance on the facts and share their thoughts for the future. The second reality is that through all we're going through all the chaos and uprooting of our lives, there's still political campaigns going on that will affect our future, whether that's the race for president, for control of the Senate, or for Congress here in New York 1. I'm running to unseat Lee Zeldin, and I have a primary to win on June 23rd in order to get there. This crisis has shown us all the importance of leadership. The focus tonight will be on coronavirus, and we'll put most of the other election issues on hold. But bear in mind that it's precisely because I'm a candidate for Congress that I'm able to bring together residents and experts as we're doing. So let's kick off the meeting now with a brief introduction of each guest and permit them a minute or so to introduce themselves. Then we can jump to your questions. First, we have Dr. William Schaffner, Professor of Preventative Medicine and the Division of Infectious Diseases at Vanderbilt University. Dr. Schaffner is a nationally renowned expert, frequently working with the CDC. He's often invited to comment in local and national media, translating research advances and public health events into language that most of us can understand. Dr. Schaffner, why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself?
Well, Perry, it's good to be with you and everybody else on the panel, as well as everybody listening in. We in Nashville and people all around the world are with you in New York as you fight this coronavirus battle, because it's serious. You are the hot spot. Nashville is warming up. There are patients being admitted to the hospital, really, as I speak, and that has been increasing over the last 2 weeks. We expect the next 2 weeks to be serious. We'll be talking about what it is we can all do. The answer is everything we can do to separate ourselves from each other, as we're doing this evening, is the key. Do it all the time. We'll talk about that a little bit more as the evening progresses.
Great. Thank you for your insights, Dr. Schaffner. Next, we have Dr. Todd Kerwin, Director of Coronary Care, the Coronary Care Unit at Winthrop Hospital here on Long Island. Dr. Kerwin is working on the front lines treating ICU patients. He specializes in cardiovascular diseases and has first experience working with COVID-19 patients suffering the advanced progression of this viral infection. He's unfortunately seen the worst phase of this disease, and he's here to share some of his observations. Dr. Kerwin, all yours.
Thank you, Perry. Thank you for inviting me. It's a very nice panel you have here, and I hope everyone on Long Island is staying safe. It's a trying time. Like Perry said, my name is Todd Kerwin. I'm a native New Yorker. I work at NYU Winthrop Hospital. I'm a cardiologist by trade. Up until about 2 weeks ago, I was just your ordinary cardiologist seeing patients with high cholesterol and coronary disease, and I also direct the coronary care unit, so I take care of some pretty sick patients coming in with heart attacks and heart failure and the like. And about 2 weeks ago, things really ramped up at our hospital, as I'm sure it did in a lot of places all over your District 1. And they asked me if I could kind of join the COVID army. So I agreed, and I got a quick lesson in pulmonary critical care medicine. And for the last couple of weeks, I've been working in the intensive care unit at Winthrop. And like I'm sure many areas around New York, we are just absolutely overrun with COVID patients. Our whole hospital is basically COVID. We have intensive care units in places that I never thought I would see patients, let alone critically ill patients. And we're fighting really hard to save every single person we can. So I'm here to share any experiences anybody has any questions about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kerwin. And now on to our elected town leaders. I want to offer special thanks to them for joining us. As you might imagine, they're quite busy with their own responsibilities. And first will be Valerie Cartwright, Brookhaven Town Council for the 1st District. Valerie is also a candidate for State Senate. Valerie, take it away.
Just unmuted myself. Hi, Perry. First, I'd like to thank Perry for inviting me to be a part of this discussion. It is an unprecedented time, and it's a time that we need to have as much conversation as possible, connect as much as possible, and give as much information as we can to our communities. I am an elected official in the town of Brookhaven, which is the 2nd largest town by population in the state of New York, with approximately 500,000 residents. I am in my 4th term as an elected official, in my actual 7th year. I also serve on the executive committee of the Association of Towns, which is an organization that represents the 933 towns in the state of New York, advocating to the state for local municipal issues. I am also an attorney practicing for over 15 years, and I am a current candidate for New York State Senate, which is Senate District 1, which is currently held by Senator Ken LaValle, who's been in office for over 43 years. He's decided not to run for re-election, and shortly after I was sworn into my 4th term, I decided to put my hat in the race. I am here to speak to you from more of a councilwoman perspective. As you would expect, I don't spend a lot of time campaigning these days. I spend the majority of my time governing and working with my colleagues on the town board and various different levels of government, including the county and the state, to make sure that our residents are taken care of and that we are doing our jobs as elected officials to make sure that we are assisting all of our local residents as much as possible. So before I turn it over to my colleague, I do want to point out that I'm here to provide as much information as possible, but as everyone knows, you know, in situations of an emergency, we have limited legislative authority as council people, as town governments, even county governments. You know, we provide most of our authority to the executive. So that is why you hear our Suffolk County executive and our Nassau County executive and our state governor reporting to you each and every day on where we are with respect to this pandemic. So with that, I say thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to continuing this discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Valerie. Next is Jeff Bragman. Jeff is a member of the East Hampton Town Board and can provide some of his perspective. Jeff?
Hi, Perry. Thanks a lot for having me. Yes, I'm a newer member of a smaller board than Valerie, the East Hampton Town Board. And I guess, you know, part of my message amidst all the messaging that we have to stay apart, which is absolutely correct, is that we do have a functioning town board at East Hampton. We still collaborate. We're able to communicate and set some policy, although, as Valerie said, we have some emergency procedures in place as well. And I like to see the town board as an important piece of the network of communication that we need between local residents and government. And I'm happy that we can still maintain our role as a bit of a sounding board for residents. They still volunteer information, they instruct us, sometimes they admonish us, and I think it's important to have that kind of exchange that kind of makes the town board function as an instrument of communication. And I think it helps with this, what I like to think of as the network of mutuality that we have to ensure operates openly with all of our residents and volunteers. So I'm happy to be one voice out of 5. I can't speak tonight for town board policy, but I can certainly offer some observations about what's going on in East Hampton.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And then lastly, we have Jay Snyderman, the Southampton Town Super. Oh, I'm sorry, we don't have Jay. I misunderstood. Hopefully Jay will be able to join us a little bit later. So why don't we take it from there? And I'm going to introduce Hannah Jeffrey, my campaign manager, who's going to be reading the questions to us throughout the evening. We will work to get in as many questions as we can. Some were submitted in advance. Some can be submitted over Facebook Live. If you're on Zoom, there's a button on the bottom part of your screen that says Q&A, and you can use that to type in your questions. We're monitoring them, and Hannah will relay questions to us. And any question that we do not get to, I will follow up with you in the next day or two, as long as we have your text address or your email address. And with that, okay, Hannah, why don't you start us off?
Okay. Thanks everyone for jumping on. And just a reminder that you can send your questions to the Q&A portion and also on the comment section of Facebook Live. We do have over 150 people already on the town hall, just 13 minutes in on Zoom and Facebook combined. Okay, so the first question, Perry, is from Margaret. She is from, I'm going to say this wrong, Nissequogue. And the question is, Margaret asks, my son Rico is autistic and lives in a group home operated by a nonprofit agency. The dedicated, skilled, and courageous workers who have been caring for him and 8 other residents, one of whom has tested positive for COVID-19, are paid little more than minimum wage. The funding provided to this agency is almost exclusively through Medicaid. And unless the federal government increases Medicaid funding for New York State, there is no way that these workers will be paid a living wage. If elected, would you prioritize this issue? And specifically, what would you do?
Thank you, Margaret, for the question. And it's an important one. And it's certainly something that I hope, if nothing else, this crisis that we're all going through has shown us the importance of everybody making a living wage. We sort of, many of us in our daily lives, lose sight of the fact that some people struggle, and the money that we take home, even working 2 or 3 jobs, is not enough to support the cost of living here on Long Island. And we have to do better. It's got to be a priority. And I'd like to think that in the next Congress and the next presidency, more priority is given to take care of the people who really did struggle here, which means making sure everybody can earn a living wage. I hope that's a good answer, Margaret. Hannah, next question, please.
Okay, this one is from Nancy from Farmingville. Nancy's asking, if my family household ages 73, 52, and 2 children who are 7 years old have been at home, social distancing, for the last 4 weeks, can we now invite over for short get-togethers the other part of the family, 2 adults and 2 teens, that have also been social distancing? Can we hug each other? Thanks for taking my question.
Great. That's a great question. And I'll comment a little at the end, but why don't I defer to our scientists here? Dr. Schaffner?
You know, my heart goes out to that family. We're not finished with social distancing yet. You know, we've learned an awful lot. There are people who are without symptoms or only have very modest symptoms that can transmit this disease. We've all been social distancing, but I'll bet no one's been perfectly social distancing. So there are ways for this virus to get into our homes. This is not yet a time to relax. Go to Facebook, get on the phone, do other things that bring your family together. Talk to each other frequently. Not yet a time to meet face to face, I'm afraid, and this will go on for a while yet.
Let me thank you, Dr. Schaffner, for that answer. Let me follow that up with one sub question. If you're in more of a low risk group and you're social distancing with your family, and you know another family has been doing the same thing, and your children want to come and play, just those two families, are you able to merge the two at some point, or should you observe caution there too?
I think we ought to try to stay apart from each other absolutely as much as possible. It gets harder and harder as time goes on. There may be some kind of ways to alter that a little bit. Rather than gathering together in an enclosed space, maybe you can meet all in a park and keep as far apart from each other there. That will allow people to see each other, blow each other kisses, wave. No hugs yet, I'm afraid, but at least you can see each other and you can keep apart. That may be something you can do.
Thank you. That is great guidance. Before we go to the next question, Jay Schneiderman, the Southampton Town Supervisor, has joined us. Jay, do you want to take a minute or so to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I hope you can hear me. Am I coming through, Perry? Is my mic?
Perfect.
All right, that's great. Sorry for joining a little bit late. I'm Jay Schneiderman. I'm supervisor at the town of Southampton. I'm also chairman of the East End Supervisors and Mayors Association, formerly a legislator for the 2nd District, which is all of the South Fork and Shelter Island. And prior to that, I was East Hampton Town Supervisor as well. And I've been very involved since this pandemic started with trying to keep government operational and trying to enforce orders coming out of state government. We also launched a big program to deliver essentials to seniors. And now we're trying to put together a unified fundraising campaign to support all of our food pantries. So been very busy. These are challenging times for everyone, and we're just trying to figure out how best to support our medical delivery systems and try to deal with some of the economic consequences.
Great. Thank you, Jay. Okay, Hannah, why don't you go to the next question?
Okay. This question is from Brenda in Smithtown. I'm hearing a lot of talk in the news about the need, and the governor speaking about the need for beds and ventilators. And I'm curious, how frequent is recovery from the ICU?
Thank you, Brenda, for the question. I'm going to turn that one over to our ICU expert, Dr. Kerwin.
Yeah, so that's a tough one. We're a little bit early on in this, dealing with our intensive care unit patients to really give an exact number. The number that was being thrown around from China in terms of people that got out of the ICU was about 50%. I think last week I felt like we were doing a little bit better than that, but it's going to vary depending on your patient population. So China reported 50%. I'm hoping we could do better. But by the time somebody gets to the ICU, you're talking about somebody that has very severe bilateral pneumonia, acute respiratory distress syndrome, and is usually there for on the order of 1 to 2 weeks on a ventilator to try to get them off. So we're a little bit early to give an exact number of how successful we're going to be, but hopefully we'll beat that 50%.
So let me follow that up. If you're on a ventilator, if you're in the ICU, does that mean necessarily you're on a ventilator, or are there two different stages?
Right, no, so not every patient in our intensive care unit is on a ventilator. Somebody who has to be in intensive care, somebody who's kind of tenuous, on basic oxygen supplementation, like an oxygen mask or the kind of nasal prongs that people wear in the hospital. But some people we've been able to keep off of the ventilator even once they do get to the ICU, but many of the patients we get do need to be put on a mechanical ventilator.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. Hannah, next question.
Okay, so this is from Gene. This might be somewhat related, from Gene. During his press conference today, President Trump said that all the states were getting all the equipment, et cetera, that they need. Local 6 o'clock news reports shortages of various equipment around the area. So which is it?
That's a good question. I'm going to let a few people on the panel touch base with what they see to the extent that they're comfortable speaking. Any of our electives can chime in, but Dr. Kerwin, why don't you go first, and then I can give my thoughts.
I could say that so far in my institution, we've been able to give every patient that's come through our doors everything they need. But we have concerns that if the rate continues, at some point we're going to run out of many things: space, ventilators, nursing staff, sedatives, oxygen. I mean, no hospital was built for this type of inundation of critically ill patients in such a short order. So at some point, I'm sure things will run out. Right now, I could say that where I work, speak for just where I work, we've luckily not run out of anything we need to treat a patient.
Jay, or any of the electeds, are you aware of any shortages right now, or just potential for shortages? And just from what I hear on the news and listening to Governor Cuomo, the feeling is that the potential is there for shortage, and nobody wants to run out. It's not, well, you're out of hospital beds, you'll get more tomorrow, and we needed them today. So you want to be ahead of the curve, not if you're just living on the curve, that's too dangerous.
So I can only speak to Southampton Hospital. It's the only hospital within my service area. Peconic Bay would be in the Riverhead area. But my conversations with the hospital is that they're doing, they're doing okay. They have available beds, they have available ventilators, and they have enough medical staff and supplies. Could it get to a point where those supplies become exhausted? Of course it could. Right now, the caseload is something that's manageable, and they're not foreseeing an unmanageable situation. They've met the 50% expansion that Governor Cuomo had mandated, and I think they're going beyond that in terms of the number of beds. But they seem, and I've heard from a member of the board there, as well as their community relations person, that they're okay. They're telling me they're okay. And of course, lots of people are donating, and people are donating ventilators and other things, masks, food to hospital workers. And there's been a lot of community support. On Friday, there was a big parade of cars to thank the hospital workers. So they're getting a lot of community support as well, and they certainly deserve that. But as far as I'm hearing, they seem to be in pretty good shape. Now, I did hear, once in a while, I'll hear a rumor from somebody that somebody maybe on the inside who's saying that that's not accurate. But my belief, based on the individuals I spoke to, that they're in okay shape.
Sorry, go ahead.
I had someone contact me who was basically wanted to remain anonymous, that had a contact for a company that was making these protective, the protective clothing and the other items that we need. And I contacted Southampton Hospital, got a very similar response from them. They said, well, we could take donations, but our supplies seem pretty good, and we're in decent shape, but we would take contributions. And I made the same offer to the town of East Hampton, and we wound up buying some supplies through the supplier. So it seems like at the moment, they're not, at least in those two instances, there were not shortages.
And I can
Yeah.
jump in too, Perry.
Yep, go ahead.
So I can, you know, my office receives complaints every day from some of our frontline workers indicating that they don't believe that they have the proper supplies or proper policies are not being followed, you know, by certain hospitals within the town of Brookhaven. What we've been doing as elected officials, when we get these complaints, we reach out to the county to see if in fact there's any additional supplies that can be provided down to our, of course, nursing homes and to our hospitals. The last week, I believe, Suffolk County had reported that they had distributed over, I think it was 1.3 million, you know, pieces of PPE to hospitals as well as nursing homes. And most recently, I think it was today that the executive indicated that they just recently purchased 150,000 surgical masks to be distributed, and the federal government has agreed to provide 200,000. So it's a work in progress. I have been in touch with numerous frontline workers and numerous community organizations that have stepped up. We have some Facebook groups that have been created. One in particular, which I highlighted on my Facebook page today, has hundreds of community members that are coming together and sewing masks and robes and doing what needs to be done to support our local hospitals, and has in the amount of 1 week sewn over 2,000 masks to be distributed throughout the hospital. So I think it's important that we recognize that that our hospitals are being stretched. But at least I know the hospitals in the town of Brookhaven are working very hard to make sure they meet all of the mandates put down by our governor with respect to the expansion and with respect to making sure that their frontline workers, their nurses, their doctors are properly protected.
Thank you. And thanks to all the elected leaders here. What I think I take away from this message is we are on Long Island and in Suffolk County in particular doing a heroic effort of just staying on top of this. This is a challenge that none of us ever thought we'd be having to deal with. And people's true good nature is coming through, helping out, providing the supplies. I get emails frequently during the week with people offering to bring even tests, not just PPE, but tests in to the country from China, and looking for me to connect them to government organizations that can help evaluate them. So I think people are doing everything that they can and stepping up. And hopefully at the end, we're going to have a good human interest story where we can say we were all challenged, but we rose up and we defeated it together as one unit without any individual being responsible. But it's all of us. That team effort is what makes it work. So with that, Hannah, why don't you go to the next question?
Yes. So this next question is from Steffi on Facebook. Yes, Steffi on Facebook. And we've had a lot of questions about this next subject, so hopefully folks will get their questions answered. Is antibody testing the only way to determine whether someone is either virus-free or immune? Is access to antibodies the only way to get the country running again? Steffi on Facebook.
That is a question for Dr. Schaffner. So why don't you take it away?
Sure. So antibody testing, so that we're all on the same page, measures a substance, proteins, that the body has produced in response to the infection, and those build up as the infection is fought off and remains afterward. And if we can test those antibodies, we can determine who's been infected in the past and who's still susceptible going forward. These tests are only now starting to become available. There are many companies working on a variety of these different tests, and we expect in one form or another, whether it's colleges, universities, athletic teams, large companies, etc. They will all develop schemes using these kinds of tests to help them determine who among their students, workers, colleagues are positive, who are still negative, and they'll devise ways to help us get back to normal, letting people who have had the virus out there in front while we protect the other folks in a continuing fashion. So widespread antibody testing, which is not yet available, the test just coming off the line, as I say, will be a strategy you'll hear a lot about going forward through the summer.
Let me follow that up. Do you think we'll have testing available a month from now into May? It's early April, or are we talking June, July? Just in not everybody, but to a greater extent than today.
So Perry, these tests are coming online kind of as we speak. They have to be validated. You don't want tests that give you a false positive or a false negative result. So this will take a little time. And I would think as we get into May, they'll start to become more widely available.
Okay, that's a very good answer, and certainly something we should all look forward to. And let me follow that up with one other question. And do we, because it's something that I wonder about a lot, do we have any sense as to what percentage of people are being infected? So you hear about so many people being asymptomatic. Do we have any sense as to what the numbers are going to look like come once the curve is flat and we get through the hump?
I told you, Perry, I'd have to bring my cloudy crystal ball here with me to help me answer some of these questions. The short answer is we don't know that yet, but we are a very large, very diverse country, of course, and there'll be more people infected in the greater New York area than I think probably up in Montana somewhere. So we'll have to make those determinations locally. We don't really know how widespread this infection has been. It's always been ahead of us. We're still catching up.
Okay, thank you. Hannah?
Yes, so this is a question from Joanne on Facebook, watching on Facebook. Can older people take walks? Is it safe? Should they be wearing masks?
Thank you, Joanne, for the question. And I think that it's a good one. And I'm going to leave it to the medical people to give a more precise answer. But certainly, I hope the answer is going to be yes, because getting out of doors is important for all of us. Either Dr. Kerwin or Dr. Shafter, what do you think?
Well, let me jump in, and then perhaps Todd can either agree or disagree. Well, since last Friday, the CDC has recommended that when we go out and about, we ought to either be wearing a mask of some sort or do something, that you've got at home. Wrap a scarf around your face and offer some protection. If it's just the two of you who shelter together and you go out into the park and you're all by yourself, perhaps you can take them off. But any kind of proximity to others, put them on. When you're going to the pharmacy, when you're going to the supermarket, and that sort of thing. We all should be careful of ourselves and careful of everyone else around us. Dr. Kerwin, what say you?
I agree totally. I mean, I think if you're going out for a run or going for a walk in the park where you're not going to be, hopefully you shouldn't be too close to people, and you could certainly control that. I don't think wearing a mask is going to make too much of a difference. But yes, I agree. If you're going to a closed place, a store, a supermarket, drugstore, if that's what you have to do, absolutely, I would wear a mask and I would be cautious of what I touched. I don't know if this is part of the recommendation. I might even wear a rubber glove or bring a paper towel if I had to open a door, and then clean my hands as soon as I could get out of there.
Thank you. Hannah?
Yeah, so this question is from Greg. What is it like when a patient must go on a ventilator? It's actually a two-part question. So what is it like when a patient must go on a ventilator? And then why are so many people having much worse reactions than others? What are the real risk factors?
So, yeah, I mean,
Dr. Kerwin, go ahead.
yeah, unfortunately, I've had a little too much experience with that in the last couple of weeks, more than I was hoping for a lifetime. So the process is usually with these patients, it's not a kind of a sudden thing. We're watching somebody, we're trying our best to keep them off a ventilator. It gets to a point where they deteriorate and we feel that they can't really breathe on their own anymore on the oxygen we're supplying them. We kind of explain to them what's going on. Again, sadly, these patients' families are not there. Most of the time, we've been able to let them call their family member, kind of, tell them what's going on and tell them, I don't want to say goodbye, but goodbye for at least a few days because they're going to be sedated. So we give them, once we've established that, we give them a sedative, so they're asleep, and we use a kind of a scope to put a breathing tube in, and from then they don't really feel or remember anything because they're on a pretty powerful sedative and the machine is breathing for them. And the second part was, I'm sorry, what was the second part?
The second part was the risk factors.
Okay.
What do we know about the people who who struggle more and the people who do better in terms of recovery?
I'll let Dr. Schaffner answer, but I'll just tell you, I mean, from my experience, it has not necessarily, the people who are getting the severe pneumonia are not necessarily older people. They're not necessarily people with multiple other chronic medical conditions. I've had patients as young as 24 who needed to be put on a mechanical ventilator. And I've had patients as old as 77 I've been able to get off a mechanical ventilator. So there's something else there. My theory is that it has something to do with how you get the virus. Maybe if somebody inhales a large quantity of droplets, they're more likely to get the pneumonia. I just think that somebody who's older and has a lot of medical problems, if they do get the pneumonia, probably are less likely to be able to fight through it as a younger, healthy person would be. But there's something else other than age and other risk factors, other medical problems that are leading to the small select group of people that are getting the severe pneumonia form. I'm sure Dr. Schaffner, maybe you have something to add there.
Well, Dr. Kerwin sounds as though he's been working in the Nashville intensive care units. We're having the same picture. I've actually just seen some data from the CDC about people who are admitted to the hospital and intensive care units. And it's just as Dr. Kerwin says, it's not just older people and people with other chronic underlying illnesses, heart disease, lung disease, diabetes, high blood pressure is another one. But those do accentuate the risk. Young people, we have seen them in our intensive care units and being intubated also. So this virus doesn't ignore any segment of the population.
I want to add something because a few people have reached out to me and pointed this out today. People are noticing that minority populations are being hit harder in terms of hospitalizations and severity. And I think the speculation, there's an article in the Atlantic about it out currently, is that it has to do with the tighter quarters that they live in. The more dense you are, the more susceptible you seem to be. It's probably harder to exercise the distancing when you're in tight quarters.
Yeah, so Perry, this is Bill. Socioeconomics have determined risk for many communicable diseases. I wouldn't be surprised if that's true for coronavirus. It's certainly true for influenza, which is another respiratory virus. So it's not the race per se, it's socioeconomics.
And thank you for that clarification. And it shows the need, I think, for society to take that into account. And hopefully we will do better going forward. Hannah, next question.
Yes, this question is from Barry in Setauket. He wrote into Zoom, and it's for Valerie, actually. Can Valerie update us on the field hospital being built at Stony Brook?
I know they've been working diligently. As you all have looked all over Facebook and the news, they've been talking about the extra support that is coming into our community to deal with this pandemic. They are working around the clock to make sure that we are in position when necessary to be able to deal with the overflow. As again, our governor has been adamant about making sure that we are in position, to make sure that once we reach the apex, that we have the ability to provide the care that is necessary, that we have the beds that are necessary, that we have the staff that is necessary. So we will be keeping you updated on that, on the hospital, on a day-to-day basis. But I want to thank Stony Brook University for being so willing to help the community and to help people outside of the community in dealing with this crisis. They have been true neighbors as far as reaching out to community members to support the frontline workers. They also have worked very hard to make sure that information is being provided to the community, and they're disseminating it through the elected officials as well as to various community leaders and civic organizations.
Again, here, I think it's another example of Long Islanders coming together in all phases. And that's what makes us the great people that we are. Hannah, next question.
Yes. So these are two questions from two different folks, but they are related. And one is from an anonymous attendee. Both are on Zoom. So Nancy asked, how should mail be handled? How should we disinfect it? And then the other question, which I just think is related from the anonymous attendee, is do we have to wash every piece of fruit from the market with soap and water for 20 seconds?
I'm going to let our health professionals answer that. But before I do, I just want to give a shout out to the people who are really on the front line, putting their lives in jeopardy so that the rest of us can function. The mailmen, the people who deliver our packages, the people who are working in the supermarkets, not just stocking the shelves, but accepting the deliveries. The people who are delivering the fruit by truck or other produce that are making it possible for the rest of us to get by. We really do owe them a debt of gratitude, and they are not the most highly paid individuals. And we as a society, once again, have to appreciate those people who are doing these jobs, and we can't take it for granted. But in terms of the medical question, Dr. Schafter, you want to take a stab?
Sure, happy to. You know, the main way this virus is transmitted is through close personal contact within 3 to 6 feet of each other. I have the virus in me, I exhale. If you're close by, you inhale something of what I've exhaled. And if the virus is in that, you can become infected. That said, environmental contamination probably does play some role in transmission, and the way it gets to us is through our hands. We touch the inanimate environment and then touch our noses or mouths or eyes, and then we inoculate ourselves with the virus. The final common pathway are those 10 little fingers. We need to do hand hygiene very, very frequently. Now, that said, to answer the question, I think a quick wipe with something is okay for mail. I don't think we have to be obsessive about it. And likewise, you want to wipe off packages that come in, that's fine. Scrub off your apples and your pears quickly. It doesn't have to be a whole 20-second wash because those are really rather unlikely modes of transmission of the virus. But hands. Did you get what I said? Lots of good hand hygiene.
That's a great answer. Great guidance. Hannah, why don't you go to the next question?
Okay. So these are both from Zoom. Actually, I'll ask them separately. So this is again from an anonymous attendee on Zoom. Are the lungs permanently damaged after ventilator, after being hooked up to a ventilator?
Dr. Kerwin, what can you tell us?
Well, it wouldn't be necessarily the ventilator that would damage the lungs, but it is conceivable that somebody that gets a severe bilateral pneumonia that is on a ventilator because of that, it might be that there is some long-term scarring and fibrosis of the lung. How severe and debilitating that may be, I'm not sure that we really know that yet, and probably a lot of that has to do with your baseline lung function and to begin with. But I'm not certain that's fully known. I don't know if Dr. Schaffner knows more about that.
I'm with Dr. Kerwin. He's right on the mark there.
Okay, thank you. Hannah?
Yes, so this next question is from Mark. If you want to reuse surgical face masks, is it safe to put them in a 170-degree oven for 30 minutes in order to kill the coronavirus? Very specific.
Well, I will tell you that I don't know what happens to a face mask if it's put into a 130-degree oven. It certainly will get warm. It likely will kill if there is some virus on that face mask. I think we shouldn't be obsessive about this. Maybe I'm a little bit of an outlier. The important thing is to wear the mask or the scarf when you're going outside. We're not supposed to be going outside all that much. So unless the mask really becomes soil or in any way other you think contaminated, I don't think they need to be washed 3 times a week or anything like that.
Thank you. Let me follow that up. Dr. Kerwin, you gave me a story about the use of the N95 mask, PPE, that you went through during your week on the ICU rotation. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, sure. Well, I think under normal circumstances, when we go into a patient's room that has a airborne transmittable disease, we are used to, a huge stocked cabinet outside and everything we need for anyone that walks in. We put it all on, go in the room, and then we take it all off and throw it out. But the amount of masks that have to be gone through, and you've got, usually your average hospital might have a handful of patients on airborne isolation, depending on the size of the hospital. Now, pretty much every single patient in the hospital is on airborne isolation. There's no way that anybody could have been prepared for this. So we do have to reuse our N95 masks. I think that is absolutely everywhere in this country, if not this world right now. So we reuse them. We just kind of try to take care that we don't touch the outside surface of the mask and then touch the inside. But I think they've been deemed safe to reuse. I don't put them in the oven. I don't do anything to it. I just try to keep it clean.
Great, thank you. Hannah?
Okay. Yes, I'm unmuted. So this question is from Jean, and it's for the elected officials, she specified. Has there been any discussion about plans for keeping the parks and beaches open while respecting social distancing as the weather improves and the East End population continues to increase?
All right, if you want, I could try that first. Yeah, it's been a big topic of debate, the parks. The town has tremendous parks, probably more parks than most states have. And, I feel like people do need to get out of their houses and get some exercise and some fresh air. And, we have wide expanses of beaches. I can't think of a better place for people to social distance than at the beach, though you do hear reports of crowds in certain areas. In fact, from a working perspective, our use levels at our beaches are on some days approaching summertime levels in terms of the parking lots, in terms of the amount of garbage that is being generated. I don't have summertime staff levels. I have wintertime staff levels. So that's a challenge. But other people in positions like mine have suggested closing the parks and just trying to push everybody to stay at home. But I do think exercise is really critical for physical and mental health. We do have a golf course that remains open, and I'm getting a lot of complaints about that, that they're not practicing social distancing. So that's something, although we have a private company that runs it, something I'll be looking into tomorrow, whether it makes sense. I was one of the first towns to shut the playgrounds down. I felt like the playgrounds, from what I had understood about this virus, that it could stay alive on metal and plastic surfaces for a day, 2 days, 3 days. And I felt with the kids, following one another onto these swings and grabbing the same ropes and chains, that they would be passing it to their parents and their grandparents. So we did shut the playgrounds. I think other towns followed suit. There may be some playgrounds opened at schools, but I really think that the playgrounds do need to be shut down. I hope that answers the question, though.
Jeff, anything to add with the
Yeah.
East Hampton?
Yeah, we've had similar controversy over closing the beaches or keeping the beaches open. And what Jay said is true for East Hampton. We've closed some of the parks and playgrounds, and we're trying to keep the beaches open because we know that people can use them safely if they use them sensibly. And I've checked in really as recently as today with the chief of police, because there are a number of comments you see here and there on Facebook and elsewhere of people who are alarmed by what they see. But he reported back that they were getting pretty good cooperation from the crowds and pretty good understanding from people about the necessity to socially isolate, and that they really, he didn't report any significant problems in that regard and said he was getting good compliance. And I think as long as we do that, the intention is to keep the beaches open. I know that I was out on a bay beach the other night just for 20 minutes, and it just to get away from the telephone and the television, and it gave me at least momentarily a great sense of actually happiness, because I realized how lucky we are to be where we are, and that this is really the one place in the world that I should be in a time like this. And I think people need that, as long as they keep in mind the importance of staying apart. We can share our hearts, but we can't share handshakes or hugs with people.
I'd like to add something there. So town of Brookhaven was one of the towns that closed off playgrounds early in the process as well. And we've been constantly monitoring our parks and our beaches. And it has become clear to us that many adults and many young people are not heeding the advice of the elected officials, of the health professionals, to social distance, to not congregate in groups. We have had to increase our enforcement of our public safety and our law department to go out and monitor some of the overly populated parks, the ones that are attended the most, and beaches. And we've also worked with, and are still working with, the sheriff's office to have some of their deputy sheriffs circulating, to visit many of our beaches and our parks. However, even with all of those enforcement efforts, we're having difficulty controlling the population. And West Meadow Beach, for example, which is in my council district, I drive to that park every day, to Trustees Road and to the beach to see, what type of, how many people are actually in attendance at a given time. But after I leave, I always get a complaint and pictures sent to me about people congregating in the parking lot. And the parking lot seems to be the biggest issue, not necessarily the beach. When you look at the beach, people are spreading apart. The beach is large enough for people to pick a location, stay with their partner or their friend or their immediate family member and relax for a few moments. However, the parking lots are packed and every day it's overpopulated. So we're at the point, and I just asked my my colleagues to close off the parking lot for West Meadow Beach tomorrow, because there's no way that we can allow for this to continue happening if adults and young people are not taking responsibility for their own actions. We cannot continue in this fashion. Our numbers on Long Island are growing way too much, or they have grown way too much. We're hoping to start going back downwards, but the reality is, if the people don't take responsibility for their own actions, and we have to step in.
I think thanks, Valerie. I think that's the right message, is that people have to take responsibility for their own actions. And that we have to pull through this together, and indeed it's good teamwork. It brings out the best in people, but we all need to do our part. And if some of us think we can get away with essentially cheating the system, we've got to stop, because social distancing is the only path forward. Before we go to the next question, let me just remind people that they can submit their questions on Facebook in the comment section, or on Zoom if they click on the Q&A at the bottom center of the screen. There's a button that says Q&A. If you click on that, you can type in a question. And with that, Hannah, why don't we go to the next one?
Yes. This question is from, again, an anonymous attendee on Zoom. In an essential workplace with a lot of people, is an employer required to tell the staff how many people in the workplace have tested positive? Is a business or government agency required to close when workers have tested positive?
I'm going to let the elected officials answer that. I'm personally not aware of any regulation at a federal level, but I'm not sure what we're doing locally. Jay?
I'll try it. There were two pieces. So can we take them one by one? So you want to give me the first piece, Hannah?
Yes. So in an essential workplace with a lot of people, is an employer required to tell the staff how many people in the workplace have tested positive? And that's in an essential workplace.
Yeah, I mean, all this guidance is coming out of the governors, not the town. And if they've tested positive, obviously, they shouldn't be in the workplace, though they could be non-symptomatic. We're learning more and more about asymptomatic transfer of coronavirus. So I would think that if a business, an essential business, had somebody tested positive, they would want them home. And obviously, you're supposed to have this mandatory quarantine period if you're tested positive. It's supposed to be 14-day mandatory quarantine, and anyone who is in close contact, and there's a definition of close contact, which is within a certain distance for a certain amount of time, then those people are supposed to be in mandatory quarantine as well, and those are enforceable by the local municipality, local PD, and there's some fines attached to that. I think the governor may have increased those fines, but those things are supposed to happen. There's also precautionary quarantines. Those are a little bit different, and suggested quarantines, but the mandatory ones, so if somebody's positive, in my mind, they shouldn't be in the workplace, and certainly at the town level, they shouldn't be there. I know in the healthcare industries, if you've tested positive and are asymptomatic for a certain amount of time, I think they're allowing you to return to the workplace as long as you wear the PPE. But, but other than that, I would rely on the guidance that the state is providing. And I don't know precisely, maybe somebody else on the call does, in terms of what you're supposed to do in that case.
I can add something.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
I do know that we have a protocol because I got an email today about notifying, persons who are involved in managing the crisis in town hall if we know of somebody who's been ill and is out sick. Beyond that, I don't really know what the procedures are, and I would agree with Jay that they're probably coming from the governor. But I do know there's a report that we've been asked to report if we have any information of anybody who believes they were sick. But beyond that, I don't know what the procedures are.
We did establish some procedures as to how the space gets cleaned, and when the space gets cleaned, we have a professional company that comes in and sanitizes, but it has to meet certain standards. So the person who tested positive would have to have been there in the workplace within the last few days before that would kick in. If they hadn't been there for a week or so, then we wouldn't go and spend the money on cleaning it because the virus would not be still alive. But we did put together a pretty careful set of guidelines for when we go in and sanitize a workspace. So that's important too.
And I don't have much to add to that, but I do know that from some of the reports that we've been receiving from the Department of Health, it's clear that when someone is tested positive and they are mandatorily quarantined, that they do the close contact test, and that people, I've gotten complaints, into my office asking, I heard someone in my office had, was diagnosed with this coronavirus, but I thought that I would be tested, but I haven't been contacted. And I've spoken to the county, and what has been said to me is that if they were not contacted, that means that they did not fall within the requirements. So they did not fall within the parameters for the close contact, and that person should feel comfortable in knowing that they did not reach that level of exposure.
Thank you, Valerie. Hannah, you want to go to the next one?
Yes.
Please.
This question is from Bert from Southampton. Virologists seem to agree that once you are infected with COVID-19, you are immune to further infection and can't infect others. That makes this group of people this type of person extremely valuable in taking on jobs where risk of infection is high. And also they can start to rebuild our economy. We should be rigorously testing to find them and conscript them into an elite team. Do you think that this is feasible?
Well, let me take a stab at that one. In order to get there, and Bert, thank you for the question. In order to get there, we've got to get to a greater stage than we are right now. Meaning we have to have the testing as to who is immune. And for what Dr. Schaffner told us earlier, hopefully that's going to happen sometime in May, a month from now. I do think if you can have immune people go out first, it certainly makes the adjustment a whole lot easier. And if we can get enough tests assembled or available to people so they can be administered, and then it becomes a more practical solution. The determinant's going to be, to a large extent, how many people are immune, and we don't even know the answer to that right now. That's why this testing for immunity is so important. Dr. Schaffner, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, Perry, I think you're exactly right. I think we have one little footnote. We think that after a person has acquired this infection and recovered, that they are indeed protected and they will not get infected again. That has yet to be scientifically nailed down, but it is a reasonable assumption. Now, if we argue from the human coronaviruses, the ones that give us common colds, that's certainly true. But here's another little footnote. That protection lasts about a year and then begins to wane. So all the more important that we keep developing the vaccines so that that vaccine becomes available down the road when even perhaps those who've experienced the infection become somewhat resusceptible to reinfection.
So does that mean that we can all be, when we go to our doctors every fall to get our flu vaccine or other healthcare providers, that we may be getting flu vaccine and COVID-19 vaccine as well?
Well, that would be the hope. Roll up 2 sleeves instead of just 1.
Great. Let's hope we get there. Hannah, you want to go to the next question?
Yes, this is actually related to vaccines, which is why I want to ask it. Sessing is asking, is the scientific community working on a vaccine? And I would assume there's a question of what the timeline looks like in that as well.
Dr. Schaffer, why don't you take that?
Goodness, the moment that the Chinese investigators brilliantly did the genomic sequence of the virus and let that information be known to the scientific community around the world, literally within hours, people started to develop a vaccine. And indeed, there are now vaccines in the early phases of clinical trials, not just one, but several. So stay tuned. The timeline is, as Dr. Fauci keeps telling us, it's a year, actually, probably a year and a half away. So hold on to that good hope and follow the news. Vaccines are being worked on absolutely as fast as we can.
Let me thank you for that answer. But let me just emphasize something you said and highlight it. It was in January that the Chinese released the sequencing of the virus and released it to the whole world, which was really doing the right thing and doing, hopefully, humanity the favor. And I think there's a misconception around that the Chinese were not sufficient in disseminating information, that they tried to keep things to themselves. If that were true at some point in time, it certainly was not true in the overall scheme of things, because when they had critical information, they did make it public. And they are working with all of us as a worldwide community. And that's what we need to pull through this. Hannah, next question, please.
Yes. This one is from Joan from Holbrook. She sent her question in early. What is the first action a healthy older person should do if they suspect they have COVID? For instance, call their PCP, then do telemedicine. Do they have underlying conditions or not? Ways to take care of themselves.
Dr. Schaffer, why don't you take a crack at that one too?
Well, actually, Hannah outlined it very, very nicely. If you suspect for one reason or other that you might have coronavirus, call your primary care provider or other source of medical care. Don't just show up. They will evaluate you over the phone and then give you further instructions. They may direct you to an assessment and testing center. You may get an appointment to go there, and they will evaluate you further. And then, depending upon your circumstances and your degree of illness, you'll either be admitted to the hospital if you're on the more severe end of the spectrum, or sent back home with follow-up and instructions how to do the best to maintain your health and get over this coronavirus. We have to remember, 80% or more of people don't have to be hospitalized. That is a good number to keep in mind.
Just let me follow up on that, and please correct me if I'm wrong. The one thing you should not do if you suspect you have coronavirus is go to the emergency room, both for your own sake and for the sake of other people. You run the risk of infecting others, and the way things are right now, I believe you run the risk, if you're not infected, of getting infected in the process. Is that correct?
1,000% correct, Perry. You're exactly right. Please do not just show up at the emergency room. That would not be a good strategy. Please call or text or email in advance to your provider, and things will be worked out as to where you ought to be evaluated.
Great. Thank you very much. Hannah, you want to go on?
Yes. So this is a question from an anonymous Zoom attendee. Could the wide range of how people are affected by the virus be genetically related?
Doctor, either of our doctors, you want to take a first crack at that?
I think I'll let the professor answer that one.
See, I was actually hoping Dr. Corman had a quick and easy answer to that. I think we're in agreement. You can hear us say this. We're saying abba, and the reason that is, it really hasn't been studied. The reason some people, you heard Dr. Corman tell us all that he cannot predict in advance who's going to become severely ill. Yes, older people and people with underlying conditions, but that's not the whole story, he said. I'd like to underline that. What it is that selects certain younger, very strong people for a more severe course of action with coronavirus is something we haven't determined yet.
Again, you're emphasizing the point that this is just such a new virus. It's something that none of us have a basis to really work off of, and we're unfortunately learning as we go. Hannah, you want to go on to the next question?
Yes. This is from Leslie from Southold. And we've had a couple questions that are related to this, so maybe we can sort of add to it. What is your best and worst case scenario on an estimate of the date when local government and candidates running for office can begin to safely hold meetings with the public again? We've also had questions just about what is the timeline, you know, what happens when we go back out of the bubble, out of the lockdown, et cetera.
I'm going to address the pragmatic side of it, but I'd like to let one of the doctors, Dr. Shafter, probably take the first step from the health point of view, because it should be healthy. Everyone's health has got to be the priority over campaigns, over voting. We have to find a way to get through it, because voting is a critical part of our democracy, and we can't let that get away. But at the same time, we can't go out and rush the process. So any sense that, as Leslie asked, as to when it might be safe either to campaign or to vote.
Well, I'm in great peril here, because once again, my crystal ball is cloudy. And as many of us have said, the virus will give us the answer. But all that said, let me go out on a limb. I have hope that this curve will be flattened and that we will see some downturn come when the weather really gets warmer. This is, after all, a respiratory virus. Other respiratory viruses, such as influenza, are distinctly seasonal. This one may not be quite as seasonal. It may smolder along during the summer, but I hope it goes down sufficiently so that we can come back to some semblance of normal during the summer and into the fall, and then gird ourselves for perhaps a recurrence of both influenza and coronavirus once the weather gets colder again. So we'll just have to cope as things go on.
Thank you. I'm going to give my thought here, which is we have two elections that we need to be focused on: the June primary and then the November election, which is for everything. It would be great to see our country working and focusing on how we can do voting if people can't go out and get to the ballot boxes. We should, I personally think that Congress should prioritize mail-in voting and providing money to the states to make sure they're capable of doing it. I don't have the crystal ball on what's going to happen in New York in June. There are obstacles to getting voting done by mail. And at the same time, it's not the priority right now. The priority now is people's health, making sure we flatten the curve, that our hospitals don't run out of supplies or doctors in order to treat the people who are getting sick. Once we have that under control, then we should focus on how we're going to make the June elections work. Valerie, you're a candidate. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I don't think they're exclusive of each other, Perry. I think that while we are trying to make sure that we slow the curve and prepare for how we're going to deal with the next phase, because we know that even when the numbers come down, we still have a lot more to deal with respect to the economic crisis and making sure that that our constituencies are taken care of. But I think that we need to be legislating now absentee ballots by mail. And I know there's been a push. There was a push by our New York State Attorney General to do that for the April election, which was moved, of course. But to do that for the April election and to have it sent out to all of the registered voters. I would go a little further than that and say that there needs to be an increase in in-person drop-offs. And it would be great to have the absentee ballot sent out with prepaid postage. I mean, we need to protect our democratic process, and we need to do it in the best way that we can. And my fear is that if we wait until we get this pandemic under control, then we're going to be too far down the line to be able to address this properly. So I do know that there are some pending legislation. There's pending legislation before the state Senate. I believe it's Senator Biaggi who might have put forward a piece of legislation related to this. And I'm sure that there are other open pieces of legislation related to absentee ballots. I think that that needs to be moved on as soon as possible, because it also gives the constituency a little bit more comfort in how they're going to be able to deal with this. We need to start taking away all of the things that are creating additional anxiety for our constituency. Not only staying safe, but how are you going to engage in a democratic process? Because the reality of the situation is, some of us can argue that the reason we are where we are now is because some of our leadership. And you want to make sure that people have an opportunity to be able to actually exercise their right to vote in a way that is effective and that will keep people safe.
That is all a great point. And the most, it's so important for us as Americans to respect our democracy and to make sure that these votes take place. And we can't take away the right to vote, or we're not America anymore. And I can't emphasize that strongly enough. Hannah, you want to go to the next question?
Yes, Perry, this is actually for you from Tom. Perry, what are the top 3 things you think Congress should do in response to the pandemic that they haven't done already?
Tom, thank you for that question. I think the most important thing that Congress has done and should do going forward is taking care of the individuals who are most affected by what's happening right now. And they've certainly tried to do that, along with some of the money that they've sent to businesses. The first bill that they passed, that the House passed, gave paid sick leave, but it had holes, gaps in who was eligible for the sick leave. And I think you have to expand that to cover everybody. The Congress passed legislation that expanded unemployment benefits and gave lent money to small businesses that was forgivable debt as long as they didn't fire their employees, essentially, as long as they kept them on payroll. But the people who got lost in the shuffle there are the gig economy workers, the ones who were never employees in the first place. And I think we need to take care of them to make sure they have compensation. Our union workers who may get laid off have concerns about their health care benefits. because of the way healthcare works in this country, Americans who work rely on their employers to provide their healthcare systems. And the healthcare that many workers have is far superior to what they could get through the exchanges. And the exchanges are good. They're an improvement over what we had before. We had the exchange, the ACA. But if you're a union worker and you lose your job, you're going to want to maintain your health insurance. And that means getting COBRA, which is typically paid for by the employee. In past crisis situations, like in 2009, the federal government passed legislation to cover 65% of someone's COBRA payment during the crisis. And I think we need to duplicate that here. I think that that's an important step. And by the way, I have an op-ed that's going to be coming out in one of the Smithtown papers this week that talks about the steps I think we should be taking in the next recovery plan. So Tom, thank you for the question. Sorry.
Oh yeah, sure, of course. Yeah, so this next question it is from Stacy from East Hampton. She says, I see on the Suffolk County sites that a growing number of people in East Hampton, including the Springs where I live, have tested positive. It's unclear if these people are currently hospitalized. My question is, what, if anything, is the town of East Hampton doing to monitor and mitigate these cases to try to limit the spread as much as possible? Just seeing a number without a context, it's hard to appropriately evaluate the level of concern and caution that one should take.
Jeff, you want to take a crack at that?
Well, I think much of that answer was summarized by the physicians talking about the steps you take when you think you have the symptoms. It depends on the severity of the symptoms, and the first step is to talk to your healthcare provider, and you don't rush over into the ER. I actually am aware of one of the persons among the numbers. I've got the numbers off the website tonight, who I spoke to and said, I think I have the disease. Fortunately, it had sort of a mild result in that person. And so I think it's pretty clear. We're relying on Suffolk County Health Department in terms of numbers. And I think probably the physicians would agree that eventually we need much better local information about who's sick and where they are. And I think that will improve as time goes on and neighbors stay connected to each other. But I think fundamentally the steps in what you do, if you think you have the symptoms, are dictated by the steps that the physicians were telling us about. You call your healthcare provider, you then get referred for a test. You see if you meet the standards for the test, and if so, you go there. And my understanding is you will get sent back home if you're not suffering severe symptoms. So that's where we are right now. I mean, I'm wondering if the physicians would agree that our hope is that eventually we do much more universal testing, because it does seem that in other countries dealing with this issue, the ones that do best are the ones that test the broadest, keep people socially isolated, test, and those countries seem to do the best. But I'd like to hear what the doctors say about that as well.
In terms of what the question said about staying safe, I think what I would do to stay safe is just assume everybody around you could be infected and do everything you do to protect yourself. I mean, I assume everyone I go near, when I have to go to work, I interact with a lot of different people. I'm assuming everyone I come in contact with has it, and I try to protect myself. I think even at this point, my wife assumes I have it, and she stays away from me. So, I think to stay safe, you have to, at this point, I mean, hopefully in months away, we'll have a different way of dealing with this. But right now, during this peak, you have to assume everybody has it and stay away and protect yourself.
I couldn't emphasize what Dr. Kerwin says enough. It's very important. I thought I heard overtones in that question of, if I knew more about who was infected, that would make me either be more or less safe. That's incorrect, I'm afraid, man. You need to be maximally safe now, all the time. Just as Dr. Kerwin said, we should all keep social distancing. We should shelter at home. And when we go out, we should be wearing face coverings or a mask all the time, except for those rare occasions that we discussed before, where you're out in the park or other open area far away from everyone else. But other than that, take precautions on your own behalf and for everyone else. And now's the time.
I think that's very, very sound medical advice, and I hope everybody on this call understands the need to follow. Given where we are now, I think we should take 2 or 3 more questions and then probably wrap it up. I absolutely want to thank everybody who's been on the call listening, whether on Zoom or on Facebook or on the telephone, and thank our panelists for the time that they've given us. We really appreciate it. Not just me and my team, but I think all of the constituents on the call who are listening in. This advice you're giving is invaluable. So Hannah, why don't you do 2 more questions?
Okay. I've got a question from George from Southampton. The Southampton paper had an article about raising money from second homeowners. Can you tell us about that? Do you know anything about it and how it's going?
So
Jay, that one is for you.
All right. Yes, I know all about it. So I'm very involved with it. First, let me give a little bit of a context. There has been this rift forming lately. When so many second homeowners came out to the area, we weren't expecting at this time of year, and we weren't sure whether we had adequate capacity at the hospitals and the supermarkets. And there was sort of an uproar from some of the year-round local folks that we were being inundated, that it was they were bringing more than their luggage with them. That coronavirus would spread, and it would take us longer to flatten that curve and end this period of isolation. Of course, we live in an area that is a beautiful area, and a lot of people call home, some part-time, some year-round, and we have a tremendous amount of affluence. And at the same time, we have one of the lowest median incomes of anywhere in the county or on Long Island. So I looked at it and said, well, look, we're blessed in many ways. The same thing that is angering people, this affluence, and part of it is the way people acted. They didn't social distance, or they went out and bought everything in the grocery store and didn't leave anything for others. But that we could potentially tap into and harness the ability of some of the more affluent to help us through this really challenging time ahead. And there's no question. I mean, people have been very generous with buying ventilators and medical supplies, but there are going to be a lot of people unemployed and underemployed. Their food insecurity is already going through the roof. The lines at the food pantry, I was just talking to one of the pantries in Southampton, it's already quadrupled. They're trying to figure out how to ramp up. So what the story that George is referring to is an effort to create a unified fundraising campaign for all of the East End food pantries. A lot of the smaller pantries, they don't really have the ability to raise money. They're too busy delivering food. And, we wanted to create an easy kind of one-stop shop for people to donate. You could click on one button and it would take a credit card, and it would fund all the pantries in the area selected. Also, we need to understand that in some of the more affluent areas, let's say Southampton Village, somebody in Southampton Village or East Hampton Village who wants to help the workers of that area need to understand that the workers typically don't live in the villages. They live outside the villages. 80% of the workforce in the Hamptons lives outside the Hamptons area. lives west of the Shinnecock Canal. And if you want to help those people, then we really need to think more regionally. Not just donate to the food pantry nearest to where we live, but donate to the region. And so we've assembled a board of directors, we've assembled a not-for-profit structure, and we're getting ready to launch a campaign called Feed the Need. And we're going to try to raise at least $1 million for all of the local food deliveries, all the local food pantries. It's going to be a challenging effort, but a lot of people are already coming out saying they want to donate. So, and this is going to be an ongoing effort, because it's not just the next few weeks, it's probably several months that we're going to have real economic challenges. Real people who've never gone to a food pantry before, never had food insecurities, are suddenly going to find themselves needing help. And we've got issues of privacy and pride, but also trying to just really support the systems that we have in place to get food out to people. It's going to be a real challenge.
I know, and
Jeff?
yeah, I know that East Hampton Town is, the food pantries need help, and they're soliciting help through the Clamshell Foundation, but I applaud Jay's vision in trying to get a more unified approach. So far, folks are very aware of how important the food pantries are, and the volunteers are really, really wonderful citizens, and we thank them with all our hearts. It's very important, and food security is it's a coming concern. I was on a phone call with a group of people, and they were focused on it. So I think that Jay's idea to unify it in a broader approach is great, and I'm glad to hear it. Right now, if you want to give in East Hampton, you can go on the Clamshell Foundation. I've done it, and they really need it, and it's going to stay a need for certainly the immediate future for a while.
Unfortunately, I think that's all correct. And from my point of view, running a campaign, we understand the need to help out the food banks as we move forward. And we've tried to tailor some of our fundraising activities around raising money for the food banks as well. Lisa and I made a nice contribution at the end of the last month. And we'll try to do other things in the future to help raise money for the food pantries, money and awareness as well. Why don't we do one last question, and then I'm going to wrap it up. Hannah?
Yes, so I think I have a good last question here. This is from Paul. He says, how can we help those who are in need? And by those, I mean nurses, doctors, first responders, and those who have been infected. So how do we help those people?
I'm going to give a general answer, then I'm going to turn it over to the doctors who are on the front lines. I can't stress this enough, how important it is to help the people who are putting their lives on the line for us. And they are getting sick, and will continue to get sick in larger numbers. I know of doctors who had severe bouts, and one who died last week. So you can't underemphasize or you can't overemphasize the need to take care of first responders. And that may be monetary too. And it may be that at the end of all of this, we realize that we have to improve the priorities in our life and make more people want to go into medical fields, first responders. The people who are there working through this crisis deserve every penny and then some for their efforts. And I think we as a society have to take that in mind and can't forget it when all of this is said and done, and hopefully behind us. Dr. Kerwin, do you have anything to add? You are absolutely on the front line.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that I'm personally grateful for is that I have a job and I'm economically stable. during this time when a lot of people are not. So I'm pretty grateful for that. So I think that what we need more than anything, those of us who work in healthcare, is just, morale boosts and anything that can help us boost our morale and know that everybody else is out there rooting for us. And, the appreciation is nice, and that does go a long way.
Can I add a comment?
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
I've been doing some talking with grassroots folks who are, this is approaching the problem from the other end, from the, what do we do with people who are sick? And one of the suggestions that I've liked to hear is they're trying to create and cobble together resilience groups and local trusted communication networks so that very localized neighborhoods can help out each other by knowing what's going on with their neighbors, knowing who needs food, knowing who needs transportation, knowing who is sick. And that kind of information on the, the very localized level is something that will help the physicians who are studying the spread of the disease, because it'll give us better information about who's sick. And I think importantly, it'll help neighbors really engage in helping each other. We need these local bonded resilience groups that can care for their neighbors and know accurately what's going on that very localized level.
Thank you, Jeff. Let me just repeat what I said before to close this. At the end of all this, we want to be in a situation where people, young people, want to be doctors, want to be first responders, want to look at the people who helped out in this crisis as the heroes and want to be heroes themselves. And that is the American spirit that we want to capture. And we should all just keep that in mind as we go forward, because that's what makes us better as people and as Americans. And with that comment, I'm going to close. I'm going to thank our experts and local officials first. I can't tell you how much me and our campaign appreciate the time that you gave us, not just for us on the campaign, but for everybody on Long Island and elsewhere who's listening in on this call and hopefully learning. We had consistently over 100 people for over 90 minutes on this call, and it may be significantly more than that. I don't have the full count. I just saw where we were at the start and where we are right now. So that's pretty good. And thank you so much to all the participants, both for tuning in and listening. And I'm so sorry we couldn't be doing this as a live event, but also the ones who asked questions. And I apologize to everyone whose question we didn't get to, but we will, as I said in the beginning, make sure that your questions are responded to, as long as we know who you are and how to contact you. And if you have follow-up questions, you can email them to me, perry@perrygershon.com, and I will get back to you, because I'm very good about that. And I've been saying that since we started this campaign 3 years ago. Final advice in closing: stay home, stay safe, stop the spread. It's in your hands. You have the ability to change the outcome. The actions you take will determine our future. So do the right thing. That's why we're here. That's what makes us great people. It's what makes Long Island great. And with that, thank you again for your time, and good night. Bye-bye, everyone.
Right.
Thanks, everyone.
Right.
Good night. Good.